So I was just a very sort of, quiet, bookish kid. I daydreamed a lot. And I was in a community that was it felt very different to me. I grew up in kind of central Pennsylvania, lots of kind of like Amish buggies on the street and stuff like that. And it was just hard for me to find folks that really, I don't know, I felt like I could connect with on the things that I really enjoyed. So I'm not sure. I feel like, finding some of this out about myself later on, it gives me some context of why maybe I felt a little out of place or a little different.
Were you Welcome back to Lost and Found No More Secrets. My name is Heidi, and I'm the host of the show. I'm joined today by Laura Olmsted. She is my co-host, and she is the founder and executive director of DNAngels. Hello, Laura.
Hey, Heidi.
I'm so excited. We made it to season 3.
Congratulations. I'm so proud of you. I think that it's been such a success. We weren't sure when we started this. So many people have always asked us, you need to do a podcast. You need to do a podcast. And so we wanted to do something a little bit different and turn it into like a talk show and actually see visually, our guests and be able to honor them and give them more than just a voice. We wanted to give them a face. So yes, I'm so pleased. And I specifically asked for Jamie to be our first guest too, because I think she has such a powerful story. And I just wanted her to be heard.
Right. Well, we have evolved and we've come a long way, and I'm sure there'll probably be, one day we were on season 7 and look back and think, oh, wow, we sure have. So we're a work in progress, but I think we're making pretty good progress.
Yeah.
What do you say we bring up Jamie to the show? I believe you are her angel.
Yes.
And Jamie is donor conceived.
She is.
Hello, Jamie.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and talk about your story.
Yes, I'm very happy to do so.
I always like to start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what it was like growing up for you.
Okay. Well, I am a middle-aged person now. I am a psychologist. I'm a therapist. I'm a professor. So I think quite a lot about the things that motivate people and kind of make them who they are. So that was a good part to my story too. Growing up, I'm not sure. I always felt a little apart in my community. I mean, nothing really extreme, but I was an only child. And I maybe that was part of it too, just not feeling like I had somebody to kind of check in with and say, is what we're dealing with normal? Is this kind of the way things go? So I was just a very sort of, quiet, bookish kid. I daydreamed a lot. And I was in a community that was it felt very different to me. I grew up in kind of central Pennsylvania, lots of kind of like Amish buggies on the street and stuff like that. And it was just hard for me to find folks that really, I don't know, I felt like I could connect with on the things that I really enjoyed. So I'm not sure. I feel like, finding some of this out about myself later on, it gives me some context of why maybe I felt a little out of place or a little different.
Were you one of those 18-year-olds that left town as soon as you could, went off to college and explored a different new environment?
Not quite. It took me a while. I went to college very close to my hometown, just like, 45 minutes away. And then when I got my master's degree, I went even further. And then when I got my PhD, I went even further. So I feel like I was just exploring the world a little bit at a time. And now I'm back a little bit closer to home than what I was, but definitely just with a lot more perspective than I had when I was a younger person.
Talk to me about how you found out about you being donor conceived. You didn't grow up knowing, you found out later?
I found out later. My discovery happened last summer. So it's fairly recent. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's only been, since last summer. A full year hasn't even passed. It's kind of interesting. The reason that I discovered this was because I watched a Netflix documentary. So my husband and I like to watch true crime documentaries before we go to bed at night. It's one thing that we can agree upon to watch. And like I said, I like to sort of do deep dives into the minds of people, right? And people who do extreme things or deviant things are very interesting to me. So in this case, I happened to pull up a documentary, and it is called Our Father. It is about a successful fertility doctor back in the early 80s in Indianapolis who, unbeknownst to his patients, was using his own sample during these IUI procedures. And nobody knew, right? Because how would you know back in the 80s? People didn't have DNA tests back in the 80s. So people didn't find out until, the children conceived were grown and they started taking the 23andMe tests and the Ancestry tests and asking, why do I have these dozens of siblings? This doesn't make any sense. I'm watching this. I'm feeling really sort of, heartbroken and shocked by kind of how this happened and the effect that it had on the family. And on all the families. And so rewind a little bit, when I was about 16 years old, I did find out at that point that I was conceived via IUI. I think I had been questioning my mom about why I was an only child and, why she didn't have more children. And she told me at that point that she had fertility issues, like her and my father were struggling to have a child. So they had to go through quite a bit of trouble and use assisted technology to help them. And at the time, I remember thinking like, oh, seems like something I should have known about myself. But I mean,
you're still thinking that your father's your biological father, and they just needed assistance, right?
They just needed a little help. So that was always the narrative, and I just sort of tucked that away as an interesting little factoid about myself. And not everybody's conceived that way, so it was interesting. But now, again, fast forward to last summer, I'm watching this documentary, and I'm thinking in my head like, wow, like IUI at this time was this lawless Wild West. Like, I mean, people could get away with just about anything and nobody would know. And as it's the thoughts coming to me, and as I'm saying it out loud, I'm realizing that I was conceived by IUI back in that time period. So it just got in my head. It's like, well, how do I know? Like, how does anybody know that this happened the way that it was supposed to happen? And at that point, I couldn't let it go. Like, it was just in my head, and I had to figure it out. So that was my prompt to take the DNA test.
Did you feel like you looked like your father? Did you ever have any idea that, maybe I'm not biologically his?
No, so I look very much like my mother. When I would look at my parents, like, I mean, it just looks like the family tree goes down in a straight line. I look very much like her. So I never really picked up like, what do I look like my dad? But after I was thinking about this, and before I ordered the DNA test, I was pulling out old pictures and like showing it to people. I should mention my father, my birth certificate father, passed away when I was about 12. So he's no longer living, but I'm showing my friends pictures. I'm like, do I look like this person? Like, what do you think? Like, does it look like that this person's my father? And just even looking on social media at his relatives and seeing if I look anything like them or if our children look anything alike. And people were like, sorry, I can't really see it.
So let's fast forward. You take your Ancestry DNA test, you get back your results, and what happens?
Yes. So before I got my results back, I took the test, and of course it takes quite a while to get the results back. And in the meantime, of course, like my mind's just turning. And I finally decide to give my mom a call. She is still living, and let her know that I was doing this. And I said, Mom, I'm getting this test because I watched this documentary, and if I'm about to find something out that you could predict that I don't know about, now would be the time to tell me about that. Really not thinking that, that anything would come up because again, my mind was in like unethical fertility doctors. It wasn't on, like she knowingly conceived with somebody with donor, with a donor sample. So she fessed up at that point, and I said, I knew it, because my head had just been going. I just felt like it's like something happened with that documentary that unlocked this connection that I wasn't quite ready to make a long time ago. And
it's very interesting.
Yeah. So once I got my results back, at least I wasn't blindsided by them. And it was some unexpected things, some unexpected heritage, couple half siblings, which again, I'm an only child. So having any kind of siblings is really shocking to me. And then it was just time to process.
Did you reach out to those half siblings matches?
I did. Like right when I first got those results back, I just felt sort of hungry for more information. Like I was just looking for some kind of, I don't know, I just maybe a few answers that would help me understand who I am as a person. And it's like, you had this experience too, and maybe in a different way, but I would love to talk to somebody who has maybe experienced the same thing and see if we have anything in common. And I from the very start, I feel like I'm a bit of a truth seeker. Like I just feel like once I get onto something like that, I'm very stubborn. I'm like a dog with a bone. So I was reaching out to people trying to understand how this happened, who this donor might be. They didn't have any of those answers, but still, it was nice to start to make some of those connections.
Did your half sibling matches know that they were also donor conceived, or was it a surprise? Because that happens all the time where people are in the dark about being donor conceived.
Well, so one of the half siblings was aware. Another half sibling did not get back to me. Other half siblings I only knew about via half nieces, right? So it's like, well, one of their parents must have been, one of my half siblings. And those that responded to me didn't really seem to know much about it. So yeah, I get the impression that it's probably less common for people to know than it is for them to know.
Right. Hopefully that's changing now.
I
hope so, especially given what I've learned about the nature of donor conceived individuals and what's good for them, like good for their identity and their emotional health and their mental health and things like that. I mean, it's quite clear that it's better to know than not.
So how did you find DNAngels? Do you remember how you came across this?
I believe that happened because once I realized sort of that I was in this situation, I joined a lot of different social media groups for DNA surprises and, NPE things. That's something I do too. Every time something new comes up for me, I just join a bunch of groups and I just listen to the conversations to hear what is familiar or what's validating, or just learn something new about the experience. So somebody in one of the comments brought it up. And at that point, I had reached a bit of a dead end. Like, I don't know anything about searching through DNA or making connections. So once I realized there was an organization that might support me with that, I'm like, well, of course, that's the next step.
I'm so glad you found it. So you got assigned to Laura. Laura, tell us a little bit about her case as far as the DNA was concerned.
I have no idea.
You don't remember?
Edit that out. Edit that out. I don't go back and re-watch that or refresh my memory before we do these, because we want it to be organic. So I can't answer that question. So we're going to edit that question out.
Okay. I thought she was the case where you did a client story and you said I was wrong. I
was wrong.
Okay. Well, you just don't want to, we're not going
to. Okay. I can do that. Ask me the question again.
So Laura, tell us, once you were assigned to Jamie's case, tell us about her DNA and what you had to work with.
Okay, I can do that. So Jamie's case was cut and dry when it came to one set of great-grandparents. So we all know that when you're sorting out DNA matches, you've got two networks, one for your grandma and one for your grandpa. And we never know who's going to be grandma and who's going to be grandpa until they come together in a marriage, right? So when we're building out a tree, we start at like the great-great-grandparent level or the great-grandparent level. So for her, I was easily able to identify one set of common ancestors, which was one set of great-grandparents. And I knew that one of their children had married into the other network. However, the other network was very small. We had tiny, tiny matches to it, and I couldn't find any kind of like even a common surname because they were recent immigrants from Germany. And that set of great grandparents had 5 children, and 3 of them were direct DNA matches. So I knew it was one of 2. And confession time. I actually got the first answer wrong for Jamie. So I said, first of all, the remaining 2 children that did not have DNA matches, both of them married a German spouse. And I'm like, okay, we're going to have to go at this differently. Jamie was born in a certain area of the country, and there was only one of those children in that area of the country. The other child of those 5 moved to California, and I just automatically was biased. I said, there's no way it's under there because they were not in the area. And at the time of Jamie's conception, they were using fresh gamete. So fresh sperm had to be used. So I'm like, it has to be the person that's in the area. And they only had one grandson. So their child, great grandparents had 2 children remaining, 2 lines remaining. And then each one of them only had one son and one had 2 sons. But the 2 son ones was in California. So I just automatically excluded them and went straight to this guy. And I looked at him up and I'm like, he doesn't actually fit a donor profile, but he's the only one at Ground Central. So I said, reach out to him. And so Jamie did reach out to him. And I believe his sister, which she has a little story about the sister. We did find out that I was wrong. And so when they were so adamant about being wrong, I looked at the other line, and lo and behold, one of the 2 grandsons that I never looked at before was a physician. And when I pulled his background, he was in that area of the country during those years. And I'm like, I felt like I had egg on my face. I was so embarrassed. Because we know confirmation bias is a big thing in our industry. And I didn't have to rush to get to an answer or anything. I really just did not do the secondary confirmation that I should have. So I apologized, and I even said, I'm so sorry that you had to go through this with the family, because, that's embarrassing for her too. We did eventually find the donor, and then that's the rest of the story. Jamie needs to fill you in. So let's talk a little bit about what happened when you reached out to your biological cousin, who wasn't dad, and his sister. And we'll take it from there. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah. Well, nothing happened at first. I reached out and I wasn't getting any responses. So it became frustrating, and I don't want to be pushy, and I understand that I'm probably, intruding, but I also felt very deeply like this is something I want to know. And so I'm trying to balance those 2 things. But at some point I'm like, I feel like I have to try something else. Like this person is not responding to me. So maybe I can find out something via his sibling. So I reached out to the sibling, who did not receive it very well. Up until then, kind of the rejection I was receiving was the more passive sort, where people just would not be responding to me, which is its own sort of frustrating. But she was very unhappy, very suspicious, thought that I was a scammer or a spammer. And then once I told her enough of my story for her to believe that I wasn't a scammer, then she thought DNAngels was a scammer who was scamming me and, kind of making me think that something was true that wasn't. So the response was quite aggressive, and, I get it. People aren't ready for these kinds of things, and people have these kind of sets of values. And when something like this happens, I think it very much tests their definitions of family and kind of, their beliefs about their relatives. I'm not sure. So I can understand why that would be off-putting for a person. But it was very stressful for me just because I was already emotional going through this process, just wanting to find things out and finding all these roadblocks. And when I received that kind of very sort of aggressive rejecting response, it was the first time that I felt, am I doing something wrong here? Am I being selfish by kind of pursuing this when obviously these people don't want to be pursued, and wondering if I should just sort of give up then. So it was the only time that I really felt that, like, oh, I feel bad about this, because up until this point, I feel like I have a pretty good attitude. I mean, one of the nice things about finding this out in your mid-40s is that your identity is pretty much set, right? I mean, I have my life, I have my profession, I have my kids, I have my family, like I have these things. So it wasn't like it was this huge blow to my sense of self.
Right. But you still have a right to know your biological truth and where you came from.
Well, yeah, and there was this missing piece, right? Like I'm looking in the mirror and like there's 50% of me that's from someplace I had no idea. And it was just very disconcerting. So
not to interrupt you, but it would have been so nice for her to come at you from that perspective instead of being so offended that there might be this unknown child out there and that her brother never donated gamete. You're much nicer than I am, because she also emailed us. I mean, I think she was not very nice, and it costs nothing to be kind. It costs nothing to be kind.
Yeah. I mean, I think that she perceived it as an attack on her family and on the self, which is part of the problem in this kind of world of NP, right? I mean, it's like this is this very closed family secret, and you're not supposed to be digging around where you're not supposed to be digging. And that's part of the secrecy and shame that creates a lot of the problems for, people who were conceived like I am and the people who donated too.
So you decide, okay, let me leave this lady alone. Laura found the right guy. Do you reach out to him? How does that go?
Yeah, so at that point, I said, Laura, I don't think that my heart can take much more of this rejection, but yet I do still want to find out. So at that point, I used DNAngels, the liaison services, to make those contacts for me, because I figured, well, at least if this person is very mean and rejecting, at least I don't have to be the recipient of it when I'm already feeling relatively fragile and I'm kind of having a hard time with things. So I kind of passed that off, so that you guys could do the work that you do. And that's how the connection was finally made. And I was shocked by how fast it happened. Like once things started rolling, I mean, things happened quite quickly. So Biofather did respond, albeit reluctantly, and agreed to give me some of the information that I was looking for. So that's when he wrote me the letter, and that came a couple days later. So, that's part of the end of the story, right? The letter did not invite a response. It was, I think, as kind as he probably could have been, being that he really didn't want to be contacted. So I'm grateful that he responded at all, because I know a lot of people in my situation don't get the answers that they're looking for. Like the person on the other side just can't go there. So I was quite relieved that there was at least that type of closure.
Right. And you were able to see pictures. I'm sure Laura was able to dig up some, social medias or pictures or something. So you at least be able to see a face.
Yes, of course, like the little light social media stalking that one does as part of this journey.
What are you talking about, light? Heavy digging.
Well, the funny thing is, I look at the pictures and I don't think he looks that much like me any more than my birth certificate father did.
Mom genes are strong.
Yeah, but one of the interesting thing is, like, even through the letter that he sent me, like the way that he uses language, and even the way that he was kind of using intellectualism to justify himself, I could see some of myself in that, you know. I mean, he's a physician, right? He's a very smart person, and I can tell that he was sort of using his knowledge of medicine and research and things to try to support his point of view. And at that point, I'm reading this, I'm like, wow, like, you know, some of this does, like, it feels familiar to me. And also too bad for you, because you're going to try to use science to tell me why I don't really need this information or shouldn't be looking for this information. Well, I'm a scientist as well. So, so even though this letter did not invite a response, I think that I will
Did you
write
respond to the
one.
letter?
I did.
Can you give us some examples?
Some examples of what I put in the letter.
Right, what he said to you and then how you responded, because I know that you actually referenced articles that he could look into himself. No, I really appreciated it, appreciated that. And then I love seeing references to articles that involved our community members. So I would love to hear some examples of what you felt like he said to you that needed a response. I know you responded to all of it, but what are some highlights that you can give us?
Right. So the things about the letter that kind of, you know, rub me in that kind of place where I'm like, don't say that to me, were sort of, he was trying to make a case that knowing your family history, like your medical history, is not that useful really, because, you know, people lie, people kind of don't always know everything, common diseases and problems are common. So having this background information really isn't this kind of holy grail of, like, you know, importance to your health that people think that it is. So, you know, he's like, I just really don't like to use family medical history to
And
know
he's the
more.
doctor.
And I was saying that he's a doctor, like he's a medical doctor.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think that this is another really good example of people, even when people are very intelligent, I mean, people, their knowledge is still taken in a very self-interested way, right? I mean, he kind of takes in, like, if he saw an article once that said, like, well, you can't always depend on family health history, it's like, yeah, that's why people don't need to know that. And it's sort of a justification of why, you know, maybe you have all these, you know, people out there that have your DNA, but it's okay that they don't know that information. So I think he has to believe that.
What was your response to that?
Well, so my response was that, well, you know, he is a physician and I'm not going to argue with him on points of medicine, but I am a psychologist and I am concerned with mental health. So I've also done my research about kind of people in my situation. And here is the harm of people not knowing this aspect of themselves. And then, of course, I put on my little bulleted points of, like, all the research. And there's not, I mean, there's not a ton of research out there yet, but there's enough and it's growing. And so this is, I should mention this, this is what I do as well, because when I'm going through something new, right, I join all my social media pages and I also go and see what the literature says about it, because I believe in the literature, right? I am a social scientist. In the literature, I find some validation. I find some understanding about how people who have this experience, how they tend to react and what their experience tends to be. And I can see myself in that. And it's almost comforting to know that my experience isn't, you know, I'm not alone here. This is not just me going through this. Almost everybody who goes through this has this experience. So I cited some of the research that talks about, you know, I mean, when people don't find out about their donor conceived status early on, they don't do, they do better than, okay, so people who find out early on do better than people who find out later. When it feels like something the person has just always known about themselves, rather than this kind of shock to their identity. It's like they're already figuring themselves out, and then they find this new thing. That creates more angst, that creates more stress, that creates more problems with your family, right? It's like you held the secret from me, and that can create issues with the family. So just the importance of knowing early on. I cited quite a bit about just people's journeys and how it affects their sense of self, how it affects their mental health, how it affects their relationships. There's some research out there that shows it's self-report research, but people who are donor conceived or who have had this NP experience, they have higher rates of different mental health problems, of anxiety, of OCD, even like ADHD and like other things. And it's like, this isn't non-important. I mean, donor conceived children do tend to be relatively well adjusted in the grand scheme of things, probably because they are much wanted children, right? I mean, their parents went, out of their way to conceive and bring a child into the world and had the resources to do so. So they tend to be well adjusted, but there are these kind of special issues that they have that other people don't have. And a lot of that is related to that kind of missing sense of self.
Is there any other specific points in the letter that you want to address?
I should pull it up here. I should have had it pulled up to remember. What else did I say in the letter? I talked quite a bit just about the personal impact on me. And one of the things I really wanted to, kind of communicate to him is that I'm not angry. Like, I'm not angry at him. I don't think that he did anything wrong. I think that, he shouldn't be ashamed of this. It makes me sad that he's obviously embarrassed by this because he didn't do anything wrong. And it's like, you look at the big picture. It's like, okay, so you did this thing just to kind of get some money to pay your way through school. And now because of that, there's all these people in the world who have your influence, like they're out there, like having careers and having children and having lives, and all because you just wanted to get your way through med school and you needed a couple extra dollars. I'm like, it's remarkable. And I wish that you could, let go of the shame and embarrassment that might be around that, because it really shouldn't be there. I'm refusing to feel shame and embarrassment about it because I know that wouldn't be good for me.
Didn't he say, I've got the letter pulled up. Hang on just a second.
It's like, here's the receipts.
He said something. Just a second. I don't have it here. Didn't he say that he was a donor for X amount of years and he frequently did it because he wanted to offset the cost of school?
Yeah, he even gave like a calculation of like, based on this rate of donation for this length of time and the success of IUI treatment, I estimate there's, this many of you out in the world. Which again, I mean, makes me wonder, like, when am I going to get the next like match on my 2020 or something?
I was going to say, it's sibling season. I hope you're watching.
I kind of hope that they do, because I feel like, from this whole process, I've been the one kind of pulling. It would be nice to be the one to give it like answers to somebody else, rather than feeling like I'm looking for these answers that people aren't really, wanting to give. But the other thing about the letter, like, he said something to the effect of like, I hope that you something to the effect of, I hope you really dig deeply and soul search about why you felt the need to find me. And, that kind of, stuck with me a little bit, because it implies that I hadn't thought about it, and I hadn't thought about why I wanted to do this, or the importance of it, or the effect that it might have. And, I just... So I developed a new cause, right? I really feel like if people want to know, they really should be able to know. And I understand that these people back in the late 70s, early 80s, I mean, they had this assurance of confidentiality. Times have changed, right? I mean, this is a different world we're living in. And the assurance that you once had was based on this old science and this old technology, but it's different now. And it's like, well, you did this and there were consequences to what you did. So, so this is the consequence, right? Every now and then there might be somebody reaching out wanting to know a little bit. And
I think it's more, Lori, we work a lot of donor conceived cases. I think it's more average that the donors are expecting this. They're expecting the letter. They're expecting the call. In fact, just solved a
That's
donor
our
conceived last week.
experience.
Just solved a donor conceived case last week, and he called the physician, the donor, and he's like, hey, he was in his car, and he said, I've been expecting this call, and I absolutely did donate during college, but I just pulled up at the hospital. Call me back at this number this evening, and I'll be willing to give you any information that you want. I mean, it's not going to be invited to Thanksgiving dinner, but at least he was kind. Like Laura says, it costs $0 to just be kind.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be fair, in his letter to me, he was not, he was kind in the letter. Like, I do feel like he went out of his way to not, make me feel maybe worse than I already did. So I appreciate that. But there is, I think it's hard to not feel somewhat rejected, even though that it's not about you and it's not about kind of, your worth as a person or whether or not you're worthy of being accepted or not. I think there's always that part of us that just want our parents to approve of us, even if they're not parents who were in our lives. So
I'm assuming you didn't get a response to your letter back to him.
I did not. And I said, even when I sent it, I didn't send it directly to him. I sent it via the organization because, again, don't want to overstep. And I even think I said, like, I don't expect him to respond or even read this if he doesn't want to. But it was just something that I personally felt that I wanted to put to paper and have it available if he would like to read it.
There were 2 letters. He sent one to Jamie that was much nicer than the one he sent to us. So I want to go ahead and read the ending statement that he gave to us in the letter that he sent to us, because I have a response. He said that you may keep the letter, a copy of my letter on file should any other of your clients get linked to me. Note the copyright verbiage. It must be forwarded in its entirety and without changes. I'm sure that you believe that your small 501c3 organization is doing good in the world, but that is more than outweighed by the inappropriate, unsolicited, and ethically suspect dissemination of personal information about non-consenting individuals. Please do not contact any other members of my extended family in the future. And this is what I'd like to say. I think it's ironic to receive criticism about disseminating personal information when our work is about helping people discover their own truth. Donor-conceived individuals never consented to the anonymity forced upon them, and they have every right to understand their origins. Yes, we're a small 501c3, but with over 7,000 families reunited and lives forever changed, our impact speaks for itself. Including copyright language in a personal letter is certainly unique, but unnecessary. We have no plans to monetize negativity. Our mission is to empower and bring healing to those searching for their identity. It is a shame some see this as invasive, but no letter will deter us from continuing to change lives for the better.
That was very, very well put. And it is important to note that the donor-conceived person did not sign any agreement to any kind of not say the word,
anonymity.
Thank you. That's a tough one.
It's ironic that he used the word disseminating too, when he literally disseminated.
It's very passive aggressive. I wish, honestly, I know we have to rise above this. We have to, but I wish I could just read the entire nastiness of his letter to us and go point by point and say many things. But I have to rise above. When they go low, we go high. We have to. Right. Every once in a while, I go low. I have to, because it's just in my nature to fight back. But when it comes to the organization, I'm trying very hard to go high when they go low, because you're our mission, Jamie. Mm-hmm. We want you to know your truth, regardless of what the outcome is. You deserve to know your truth. It isn't his family, Jamie. It's your family too. And if you have a cousin reach out, I want you to own that because she's your ancestor too, regardless of what your donor says.
Thank you. I
I
appreciate
literally want to cry.
It is. I mean, I think one of the nice things about being in my position and having spent a long time studying human behavior and sort of what goes on in people's minds, I can understand it more. Like, I understand that people's behaviors and responses say a lot more about their experience, kind of the way that they have been processing and thinking about things in their life. I mean, to him, this is this embarrassing thing he'd rather forget. And for me, it's my identity, right? So he's
Yes.
looking at it through his kind of biased viewpoint, and admittedly, so am I. But still, I really do hope that we can progress to the point where it doesn't feel that fraught anymore, because I mean, now people can't donate with this expectation that it's going to be secret forever. I think that promise was something that should not have been made, not knowing kind of what happens in the future and knowing that technology
You have such
advances
wisdom.
rapidly.
You have such wisdom for being a new, finding out, fresh. It hasn't been that long, and I can really tell that you did inherit his brains, and the fact that you've done your research. I think that you're going to be a great advocate for the community. I hope you continue to continue your research and be an advocate for the other DCPs.
Thank
In
you.
conclusion, Jamie, what advice do you have to somebody that is in the same situation as you are, where they've reached out and they're not getting the warm welcome that they had hoped for? What advice do you have to them?
Yeah, I would say probably the best advice would be to not internalize that. I think that, you go into this and you have to know just from the very start, like the reception that you get might vary. You might get warm receptions, you might get no reception, you might get a negative reception. And you have to sort of, be in a place where it's like, I'm going to be okay no matter what response I get, because whatever response I get, just because they are maybe being rejecting of me, it's not rejecting of me, right? They're rejecting the situation. They're rejecting kind of these actions and these behaviors that happened so long ago, but it says nothing about me as a person. And it doesn't say anything about you as a person if people are not kind of reaching out and taking you in. And honestly, I feel like I struggle with that sometimes. In the back of my mind, it's like, well, maybe if I were a more impressive person, like maybe if I was if I were like a big star, like they'd want to connect with me because like, it would be like, wow, I really want to get to know that person. And that's silly. Like, it's silly to think that, but the feelings still come. So I think you just have to have that permission and the willingness to give yourself space to feel the things that you feel, ultimately know that you're okay, and like you are who you are, and how they receive you has
How they
nothing to do
receive
with
you
that.
doesn't define you.
That is it. That is
Right.
it.
Well, thank you, Jamie, for taking time out of your day. We've really enjoyed having you on the show. Please keep in touch if there's anything new. I know Laura would love to hear if you have any new updates in your story.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
buckle your seatbelt for sibling season, because those Christmas kits are going to be coming back any day now, and so
I
you maybe
hadn't thought
need
about
some
that.
matches.
Yeah, every year it could be a new surprise. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you do. I think it's so important. And again, no matter what anybody says, you are helping people.
Thank you, Jamie. That means a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow.
She's so articulate.
She is. I really saw a lot of familiarity in her writing style and her donor style. I think that she could have easily, and she did, go tit for tat with him. In his style of writing to her, she wrote back in pretty much the same style. Same style.
I
really
wonder
did.
if he noticed that. That would be interesting. Of course, we'll never know, but it would be
Yeah.
it would be cool to think he would say, you know, oh, that's something I would have said and done, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think that our experience with donors is just so different. I really feel like so many more of our donors are accepting than they are non-accepting. It always hurts me. I literally take it personally when a donor behaves or reacts that way to one of our clients, regardless of the circumstances. Even though I named his cousin first, that really has nothing to do with it. That's part of the research. You know, just like a doctor, you may inadvertently go down the wrong path. It's like a rabbit hole until you run one more test and then you find the actual diagnosis. That's kind of how I feel this went. But there's just no reason for him to be the way that he was. And he's so nonchalant about the fact that he donated so many times during med school with his wife's full knowledge so that they didn't have to have student loans and things like that. And I'm like,
wasn't it just like $20 each time?
It wasn't that. You don't even get that much money by donating back then. But apparently he did it a lot. So I'm really expecting Jamie to have a large sibling pod as people are start testing. Excuse me. But he was so nonchalant about it. And I don't find it to be a nonchalant subject. Though some of us, you know, feel stronger and more passionate about it than others. He's obviously one of the others. He could care less. But, you know, he's got children that one day may test just to see. And they're going to have a rude wake up call.
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
It's too easy to order these at-home DNA testing now, and people are curious, you know, they want to know their ethnicity, if nothing else.
Yes. And they're even getting cheaper. They're just so affordable nowadays. I mean, it's the cost of a very large pepperoni pizza.
I know. That reminds me of Peter Boney. I listened to his story on a podcast one time, and he was one of the first testers. I want to say at 23andMe, and he paid, it was like $1,000 or something.
A lot of money.
Lot of, this is years and years and years ago.
Yes.
But to go from that to $39 on sale, I mean, it's no more secrets, right?
Yes.
Well, let's close with that. Laura, I appreciate you. I love that you were my very first co-host on the first episode of season 3.
We have other things to look forward to too. You have another new co-host that we're going to be meeting.
I know, Brenda. I am excited about Brenda is the angel team lead for Team Puerto Rico. Yes. So she's really sweet. I'm enjoying having her co-host also.
Well, until next week.
Yeah, see you Thursday. Bye, everybody.
Bye.